I never thought a pile of snow would turn me into the most hated person in Pinewood Ridge Homeowners Association. But here we are, and honestly, I have zero regrets about what happened next. My name is Richard Quincy, and I bought my house in this upscale neighborhood in Boulder, Colorado 3 years ago. The place seemed perfect at first, with its manicured lawns, mountain views, and promises of a tight-knit community. What they don't tell you during the house tour is that the HOA board consists of people who apparently have nothing better to do than measure your grass height with a ruler and count how many seconds your Christmas lights stay up past January 1st. The winter of 2025 hit Colorado harder than usual. We're talking about back-to-back blizzards that dumped nearly 4 feet of snow in 3 weeks. I'm a software engineer who works from home, so my main concern was keeping my driveway clear enough to make emergency grocery runs and maybe get some fresh air without trudging through waist-deep powder. I'd been out there every morning with my snowblower, clearing a path and piling the snow along the edge of my property line near the street, exactly where any normal person would put it. That's when I got the first notice. It came on a Tuesday morning, tucked into my mailbox in one of those official-looking HOA envelopes that make your blood pressure spike just by looking at them. I opened it while standing in my driveway, my breath visible in the freezing air, and read the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen in print. Dear Mr. Quincy, it has come to the attention of the Pinewood Ridge HOA Board that you are in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4B of the Community Bylaws regarding snow removal and placement. Your snow piles are creating an unsightly obstruction and must be relocated immediately. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $500. Sincerely, Patricia Winters, HOA President. I stood there, snow crunching under my boots, rereading the letter 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Section 12, Paragraph 4B. I'd read through the HOA bylaws when I bought the house, like any responsible homeowner, but I didn't remember anything about snow pile locations. I went inside, pulled up the digital copy I'd saved, and searched through all 47 pages of bureaucratic nonsense. There it was, buried in subsection after subsection of legal jargon. Apparently, snow piles were not to be placed within 15 feet of the roadway curb, nor within 10 feet of any property line, and they should not exceed 5 feet in height or create a visual obstruction to neighboring properties. The problem: my property was only 60 feet wide. If I followed these rules, I'd have a narrow corridor down the middle of my lawn where I could legally pile snow, which made absolutely no sense from a practical standpoint. I called the HOA office immediately. A chirpy receptionist answered and transferred me to Patricia Winters after I explained my issue. Patricia's voice came through the line like fingernails on a chalkboard, that particular tone of forced politeness that barely concealed contempt. Mr. Quincy, the rules are quite clear. We've had multiple complaints from your neighbors about the appearance of your property. Multiple complaints. The snow just fell 3 days ago. I've been keeping my driveway clear, which is more than I can say for half the neighborhood. And who exactly complained? I'm not at liberty to disclose that information. However, I can tell you that the board takes these matters very seriously. We have standards to maintain in Pinewood Ridge. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. Patricia, with all due respect, where exactly am I supposed to put the snow? If I follow the measurements in the bylaws, I'd have about a 10-foot by 20-foot area in the middle of my front lawn to pile 4 feet of snow. That's physically impossible. That's not the board's concern, Mr. Quincy. Perhaps you should consider hiring a snow removal service to haul it away. Haul it away. Do you have any idea how much that would cost, We're talking about tons of snow here. Again, not the board's concern. You have 48 hours to comply or face the fine. Have a nice day." She hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone, feeling that familiar mixture of frustration and disbelief that seems to come with every HOA interaction. I walked to my front window and looked out at my snow piles. They were neat, compact, and exactly where anyone with common sense would put them. They weren't blocking anything important, weren't encroaching on anyone's property, and would melt in a few weeks anyway. But apparently, common sense and HOA regulations existed in parallel universes that never intersected. I decided to do some investigating. I drove around the neighborhood, noting where everyone else had piled their snow. Out of the 38 houses on my street and the adjacent blocks, 22 had snow piles in similar locations to mine. Some were even bigger and closer to the street. Yet somehow, I was the only one who'd received a notice. That's when I spotted Patricia's house. It was a large colonial-style home at the end of Oak Drive, the kind of place that screamed, "I need to feel superior to my neighbors." Her driveway was immaculate, professionally cleared, and yes, there were snow piles along her property line in almost the exact same configuration as mine. The hypocrisy was stunning. I took photos of everything. Every snow pile in the neighborhood, including Patricia's. I documented the distances, the heights, the locations. If she wanted to play this game, I'd play it with evidence and facts. The next day, I drafted a formal response to the HOA, citing the photos and pointing out the inconsistent enforcement of the bylaws. I requested an emergency board meeting to discuss the matter. I was polite, professional, and thorough. I even included a proposal to amend the snow pile regulations to something more realistic for Colorado winters. The response came 2 days later. Not only had my appeal been denied, but the fine had been increased to $750 for failure to comply within the designated time frame, and for filing a frivolous grievance. Attached was a terse note from Patricia stating that other homeowners' snow piles were under review, but my violation was the most egregious and took priority. I'm generally a calm person. I don't yell, I don't throw things, and I don't make rash decisions. But standing in my kitchen, reading that letter, something inside me snapped. Not in an angry, explosive way, but in a cold, calculated way. If Patricia wanted to be ridiculous about snow pile locations, I'd give her exactly what she asked for. I pulled up the HOA bylaws again and read them more carefully this time. The clubhouse, which sat at the entrance to our neighborhood, was technically HOA common property. The parking lot, the grounds, everything within its fenced perimeter belonged collectively to all homeowners. The bylaws stated that homeowners had equal access to all common areas and could use them for reasonable community purposes, as long as they didn't interfere with scheduled events or cause damage to HOA property. I checked the clubhouse calendar online. Nothing scheduled for the next week except Patricia's weekly bridge club on Thursday afternoon. Perfect. I made some phone calls. My neighbor 2 doors down, Frank Morrison, owned a landscaping company and had access to heavy equipment. Frank had received his own ridiculous HOA violation the previous summer for having his work truck parked in his driveway overnight, so he was more than sympathetic to my situation. "You want me to do what?" Frank asked, laughing when I explained my plan. "Move all my snow piles to the clubhouse grounds. Legally, I'm allowed to use the common areas. The bylaws say snow can't be piled in certain locations on private property, but they don't say anything about HOA common property. And I'll make sure not to block any fire exits or violate any actual safety codes." Frank was silent for a moment, then I heard him chuckling. "Richard, that's either brilliant or insane, possibly both. When do you want to do this?" "Tomorrow morning. Early. Before Patricia makes her daily rounds. I'll bring my skid steer. This is going to be fun." I spent the rest of the evening reviewing my plan, making sure I wasn't actually breaking any laws or regulations. The clubhouse had 3 entrance gates, 2 for vehicles and 1 pedestrian gate. The bylaws required at least 1 emergency exit to remain accessible at all times. I'd make sure of that. But the main gates, those were fair game. Frank showed up at 6 in the morning with his skid steer loaded on a trailer. The sun wasn't even up yet, and the temperature hovered around 15 degrees. We worked quickly and efficiently, loading up my snow piles and making the short drive to the clubhouse. The property was empty, silent except for the sound of the equipment and the scraping of snow. We started piling the snow right in front of the main vehicle gate. I directed Frank to create a massive wall of snow, easily 8 feet tall and 12 feet wide. Then we moved to the second gate and did the same thing. We made sure to leave the pedestrian gate and 1 emergency exit completely clear, and we didn't pile snow against any buildings or structures. Everything was on the paved parking lot area, technically not causing any damage. It took us 3 hours, but by the time we finished, the clubhouse entrance looked like a fortress built by winter itself. The morning sun was casting long shadows across the pristine white barriers we'd created. It was beautiful in a petty, magnificent way. "Think she'll notice?" Frank asked, grinning as he loaded his equipment back onto the trailer. "Oh, she'll notice. Thanks for your help, Frank. Anytime. This is the most fun I've had with snow in years. Let me know if you need anything else." I drove home, took a hot shower, and made myself breakfast. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang at 9:30. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. "What did you do?" Patricia's voice was shrill enough to break glass. So much for professional courtesy. "Good morning, Patricia. I'm not sure what you're referring to." "Don't play dumb with me, Richard. The clubhouse. The gates are completely blocked with snow. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Oh, that. Yes, I relocated my snow piles as requested. The HOA bylaws prohibit snow placement in certain areas of private property, so I moved them to HOA common property instead. I made sure to follow all safety regulations and left the required emergency exits clear." "Is there a problem?" I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end. "This is vandalism. This is destruction of property. This is snow on a paved parking lot. It'll melt. And according to Section 7, Paragraph 2A, homeowners have the right to reasonable use of common areas." I needed somewhere to put my snow, and the common property was the most logical location. "We have Bridge Club today. People need to access the clubhouse. The pedestrian gate is completely clear. Everyone can walk in. They'll just have to park on the street, which I believe is public property and therefore perfectly legal." "This is outrageous. I'm calling an emergency board meeting right now. You'll be fined for this." "On what grounds?" "I'd be very careful about issuing fines without proper justification, Patricia. That could be considered harassment, and I've been documenting everything very carefully." She made a sound like a strangled cat and hung up. I smiled to myself and went back to work. My computer screen glowed with lines of code, but I found it hard to concentrate. Part of me was waiting for the next shoe to drop, and another part was just enjoying the mental image of Patricia's face when she saw those snow walls. The angry voicemail came an hour later. Then the email. Then another voicemail, this time from another board member, Douglas Chen, who sounded more confused than angry. "Richard, this is Douglas Chen from the HOA board. Listen, I'm trying to understand what happened here. Patricia is absolutely livid, but I read through the bylaws and I'm not entirely sure you actually violated anything. Can you give me a call back so we can discuss this like rational adults? I called him back immediately. Douglas had always seemed like the most reasonable person on the board, an older gentleman who'd retired from a career in civil engineering and actually understood how things worked in the real world. Douglas, thanks for calling. I appreciate you taking a measured approach to this. Well, I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Patricia says you maliciously blocked the clubhouse, but from what I can see in the bylaws, you technically have the right to use common property. Did you leave the emergency exits clear, completely clear? I also left the pedestrian gate accessible. I only blocked the two main vehicle gates, and I made sure not to pile snow against any structures or cause actual damage to property. The snow is sitting on the parking lot, where it would have been anyway if it had fallen naturally. Douglas sighed. This is about the snow pile fine, isn't it? It is. I was fined for putting snow on my own property in a location that's perfectly reasonable and identical to where most of my neighbors have their snow. When I pointed out the inconsistent enforcement, my fine was increased. So I followed the letter of the law and moved my snow to where the bylaws don't prohibit it. I understand your frustration. Between you and me, I thought that initial fine was excessive, but Patricia insisted, and she's very particular about property aesthetics. Douglas, with all due respect, we live in Colorado. We get snow, making it nearly impossible for homeowners to clear their driveways without hiring expensive removal services isn't reasonable governance, it's a power trip. Another sigh. You're not wrong. Look, let me talk to the board. We're meeting this afternoon. In the meantime, how long do you plan to leave the snow at the clubhouse? Until my original fine is rescinded and the bylaws are amended to something reasonable. I'm not trying to be difficult, but I'm also not going to pay $750 for doing normal winter property maintenance. Fair enough. I'll see what I can do. He hung up, and I felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe Douglas could talk sense into Patricia and the rest of the board. Maybe this would all get resolved without further escalation. I was naive to think that. The next letter arrived via certified mail that afternoon. I had to sign for it, which immediately told me this was serious. Inside was a formal notice of violation, a demand for immediate snow removal, and a fine of $2,000 for malicious obstruction of HOA facilities and interference with community activities. They also threatened legal action if I didn't comply within 24 hours. $2,000 for snow in Colorado in winter. I called my lawyer. Yes, I have a lawyer. When you deal with HOAs, it's basically a necessity. His name was James Porter, and he specialized in property law and HOA disputes. I'd consulted with him before on minor issues, but this was the first time things had escalated to potential legal action. Richard, walk me through exactly what you did, James said after I explained the situation. I gave him every detail, from the original fine to the snow relocation to the exact wording of the relevant bylaws. I emailed him photos, copies of all correspondence, and my documentation of other homeowners' snow piles. This is fascinating, he said after a long pause. Petty, but fascinating. And you're absolutely right that you didn't technically violate anything. The HOA bylaws don't prohibit placing snow on common property, and you followed all safety regulations. The fine is excessive and likely unenforceable. So what do I do? First, don't pay anything. Second, draft a formal response citing the specific bylaws that give you the right to use common property. Third, request a formal hearing before the full board, which is your right under Colorado HOA law. And fourth, file a complaint with the Colorado Division of Real Estate. They oversee HOA disputes and can investigate claims of harassment and improper fines. Will that actually accomplish anything? It'll put pressure on the board to act reasonably. And if they continue with this nonsense, you'll have a strong case for a lawsuit. HOAs have been successfully sued for arbitrary enforcement of rules and harassment of homeowners. The fact that other people have similar snow piles and weren't fined is particularly damning. I felt my confidence returning. Okay, let's do it. We spent the next hour drafting a detailed response. James was thorough, citing specific Colorado statutes and case law regarding HOA governance. We pointed out the discriminatory enforcement, the excessive fines, and the lack of any actual damage caused by my actions. We demanded the fines be rescinded and requested a formal hearing. I sent it via email and certified mail, making sure there was a clear paper trail. Then I settled in to wait again, though I had a feeling Patricia wouldn't take long to respond. She didn't. The phone rang at 7 that evening, just as I was making dinner. Mr. Quincy, this is Patricia Winters. I've received your letter from your attorney, and I want you to know that the board is prepared to pursue this matter to its fullest extent. Your behavior has been disruptive, disrespectful, and damaging to our community. Patricia, I cleared my driveway and put snow where the bylaws don't prohibit it. That's all I've done. You deliberately sabotaged the clubhouse. My bridge club had to cancel because people couldn't access the parking lot. They could access it through the pedestrian gate. I'm sorry your event was inconvenienced, but that's a consequence of the board's unreasonable enforcement of snow regulations. We will see you in court, Mr. Quincy. You can expect a formal lawsuit for damages, harassment, and intentional interference with HOA operations. I look forward to it. My attorney will be happy to explain to a judge why your fines are arbitrary and discriminatory. We'll also be filing a counterclaim for harassment and demanding a full audit of HOA finances to see how funds are being used. That last part was James's suggestion. HOAs hate audits because they often reveal mismanagement or questionable spending. I heard Patricia's breath catch. You wouldn't dare. Try me. I've documented everything, Patricia. Every inconsistency, every excessive fine, every instance of selective enforcement. If you want to make this a legal battle, I'm ready. She hung up without another word. I stood in my kitchen, adrenaline pumping, wondering if I just made things better or worse. My pasta was boiling over and I'd lost my appetite anyway. The next morning, I woke up to find my front yard had been egged. Not just a few eggs, dozens of them, splattered across my windows, door, and the side of my house. In the freezing temperature, they'd frozen solid, creating a disgusting tableau of yellow and white streaks. I took photos immediately and filed a police report. The officer who came out was sympathetic but realistic. Probably neighborhood kids or someone upset about your HOA dispute. These things tend to get ugly. I'll file the report, but unless you have video footage of who did it, there's not much we can do. I'm installing security cameras today, I said. Smart move. I spent the afternoon cleaning egg residue off my house and installing a comprehensive camera system, front and back, with motion detection and cloud storage. If someone wanted to escalate things, I'd have evidence. The formal hearing notice came 2 days later. The board had scheduled a special meeting for the following Tuesday evening, open to all homeowners, to discuss my violations and determine appropriate action. I was given the opportunity to present my case, though the letter made it clear the board had already made up its mind. I called James again. They're giving me a hearing. Good. That's actually what we want. It puts everything on the record. I'll attend with you and we'll present your evidence. Make sure to bring printed copies of all your documentation, the photos of other snow piles and copies of the bylaws with relevant sections highlighted. What are the chances they'll actually listen? Honestly, small. But that's not the point. The point is to create a record that shows you tried to resolve this reasonably. When we take this to court or the state regulatory board, we need to show you exhausted all internal remedies. Tuesday came faster than I expected. The clubhouse, ironically, was accessible again. The snow had been cleared, but I knew from driving by that it had been piled along the fence line on HOA property, exactly where I'd left it before someone paid for removal services. I wondered if Patricia had footed the bill personally, or if she'd used HOA funds. The meeting room was packed. Apparently, word had spread about the dispute, and half the neighborhood had shown up to watch the drama unfold. I recognized faces from around the community, some sympathetic, some clearly on Patricia's side, and many just there for the entertainment. The board sat at a long table at the front of the room. Patricia in the center, flanked by Douglas Chen, and 3 other members I recognized but had never really interacted with. There was Margaret Sullivan, a retired teacher who always seemed to agree with whatever Patricia said. Next to her was Todd Brennan, a real estate agent who'd sold several houses in the neighborhood and had a vested interest in maintaining property values. The last member was Sandra Liu, a corporate lawyer who I hoped might understand the legal implications of what the board was doing. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel that seemed unnecessarily dramatic. We're here tonight to address the violations committed by Mr. Richard Quincy regarding improper snow placement and obstruction of HOA facilities. Mr. Quincy, you may present your case. James and I stood up. I prepared a presentation with printed handouts for everyone, and James had brought a laptop connected to the room's projector. We'd gone over this a dozen times. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board, I began, keeping my voice calm and professional. I'm here tonight because I was fined $750 for placing snow from my driveway along my property line, a practice that is common throughout this neighborhood and necessary for winter maintenance in Colorado. I clicked to the first slide, which showed a map of the neighborhood with photos of 22 different properties, all with snow piles in similar locations to mine. As you can see, my snow placement was not unique or excessive. In fact, several properties have snow piles closer to the street and higher than mine were. Yet I was the only homeowner to receive a fine. Patricia interrupted. Those properties are being reviewed separately. Your violation was reported first and was the most visible. Actually, my property is in the middle of the block, while several of these others are on corners with more visibility. And I'd like to know who filed the complaint against me, as I'm entitled to that information under Colorado HOA Statute 3833.3 209.5. Patricia's face reddened. The board has the discretion to keep complainants anonymous to protect them from retaliation. James stood up. Actually, Miss Winters, that's not accurate. While initial complaints can be anonymous, once formal fines are issued, the homeowner has the right to know the basis for those fines, including who made the complaint. This is established case law in Colorado. I have several citations if you'd like to see them. The room had gone very quiet. I could feel everyone's attention focused on our exchange. Sandra Liu leaned forward, looking interested. Mr. Porter, I'm familiar with the statute you're referencing. Patricia, he's correct. If we're imposing fines based on complaints, Mr. Quincy has the right to know who complained. Patricia looked flustered. The complaint came from a neighbor who wishes to remain anonymous. Then the fine should be rescinded until a proper investigation can be conducted, Sandra said firmly. We can't impose penalties based on anonymous complaints without our own verification. I felt a surge of hope. At least one board member was thinking rationally. Patricia shot Sandra a look that could have melted the snow outside. The board verified the violation through our own inspection. Did you document that inspection? James asked. Date, time, photos, measurements. Silence. That's what I thought, James continued. Let's move on to the second issue. When Mr. Quincy attempted to comply with your fine by relocating his snow to HOA common property, which is explicitly allowed under your bylaws, he was fined an additional $2,000. Can you point to the specific bylaw that prohibits homeowners from placing snow on common property? More silence. Patricia was flipping through a copy of the bylaws, her face growing redder by the second. Douglas Chen spoke up. There isn't one. I've reviewed the bylaws thoroughly. Snow placement restrictions only apply to private property. We have nothing governing the common areas. Then the fine is baseless and should be rescinded, James said. He deliberately blocked access to the clubhouse. Margaret Sullivan burst out. My bridge club couldn't meet. The pedestrian access remained open, as required by fire code, I responded. And I made sure all emergency exits were clear. The inconvenience to your bridge club was unfortunate, but it doesn't constitute a violation. It was malicious, Patricia insisted. You did this to retaliate against the board. I did this to comply with your demands while following the bylaws exactly as written. If the bylaws are inadequate or poorly written, that's not my fault. The room erupted in murmurs and whispered conversations. I could see people nodding, some in agreement with me, others clearly thinking this whole thing was ridiculous from every angle. Sandra Liu held up her hand for quiet. I've heard enough. Patricia, I think we need to table this matter and have a proper discussion as a board about our snow removal policies. The bylaws are clearly inadequate for Colorado winters, and we've been enforcing them inconsistently. I move to rescind all fines against Mr. Quincy and form a committee to revise Section 12 with more reasonable regulations. I second that motion, Douglas said immediately. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but she was outvoted before she could even open her mouth. Todd Brennan, who'd been silent the entire meeting, also raised his hand in favor. Margaret looked to Patricia uncertainly, then reluctantly raised her hand as well. Motion passes, Sandra announced. Mr. Quincy, your fines are rescinded. We apologize for the confusion and will be reaching out for your input on the revised regulations. I felt James's hand on my shoulder, a silent signal that we'd won. But as I looked at Patricia's face, twisted with anger and humiliation, I knew this wasn't over. People like her don't take defeat gracefully. The meeting adjourned and several homeowners came up to congratulate me. Frank Morrison clapped me on the back, grinning. That was better than any reality show, man. Way to stick it to them. Others thanked me for standing up to the board, sharing their own stories of ridiculous fines and arbitrary enforcement. It turned out I wasn't the only one who'd been dealing with Patricia's power trips. There was the guy who'd been fined for having the wrong shade of beige on his mailbox. The woman who'd been cited for her kid's basketball hoop being 3 inches too far into the driveway. The family who'd been harassed for having a vegetable garden that was supposedly visible from the street. By the time I left the clubhouse, a small group of us had formed an informal coalition. We exchanged phone numbers and email addresses, agreeing to support each other in future HOA disputes and push for more accountability from the board. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. The fines were gone, The bylaws would be revised, and I could go back to my normal life of writing code and shoveling snow in peace. But I'd underestimated Patricia's vindictiveness. It started small. My trash cans were knocked over 2 days in a row. Then my mailbox was vandalized, bent nearly in half. My security cameras caught someone in a dark hoodie doing it late at night, but the footage was too grainy to identify them clearly. The police took another report, but again, there wasn't much they could do. Then things got worse. I received a notice that my annual HOA dues were increasing by 30%, effective immediately. When I questioned it, I was told that it was a special assessment to cover unexpected maintenance costs. When I asked what those costs were, I was told that information was available in the board meeting minutes, which conveniently hadn't been posted yet. I reached out to the other homeowners from our coalition. None of them had received the special assessment. It was just me. James filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Division of Real Estate the next day. "This is targeted harassment," he told me. "They're retaliating because you challenged them. That's explicitly illegal under Colorado HOA law." The state investigation took weeks to start, and in the meantime, Patricia kept finding new ways to make my life difficult. I was cited for having my garage door open too long while I was unloading groceries. I was fined for having a package sitting on my porch for more than 24 hours, even though I'd been out of town. Every violation came with a $100 fine and a smug letter from Patricia. I documented everything and sent it all to James and the state investigator. My growing file of evidence was becoming a monument to petty tyranny. Then, in early March, something interesting happened. Douglas Chen called me directly, which was unusual since board members typically only communicated through official channels. "Richard, we need to talk. Can you meet me for coffee?" We met at a local cafe the next morning. Douglas looked tired, older than I remembered from the meeting. "I'm resigning from the board," he told me without preamble. "I can't be part of this anymore." "What happened?" I started asking questions about the finances. "After your attorney mentioned an audit, I got curious. Patricia has been very defensive about the budget, always has an excuse for why certain expenses aren't itemized or why receipts are missing." I pushed harder, exercised my right as a board member to review the books, and I found some concerning discrepancies. My coffee went cold as Douglas explained. Over the past 3 years, nearly $80,000 in HOA funds couldn't be properly accounted for. There were vague line items for maintenance, improvements, and professional services, but no supporting documentation. Checks had been written to companies that didn't seem to exist or couldn't be verified. I confronted Patricia about it in our last board meeting. She said I was overstepping, that she had everything under control, that the documents were in storage. But when I asked where specifically, she couldn't give me a straight answer. Sandra started asking questions too, and Patricia shut down the whole discussion, saying we could address it at the annual meeting in June. "Douglas, this sounds like embezzlement." "I know. That's why I'm resigning and why I'm telling you this. You've been willing to stand up to her when no one else would. I think someone needs to demand a full forensic audit, and it should come from a homeowner, not a board member. If it comes from me, she'll say I'm just bitter about resigning. If she's been stealing from the HOA, this goes way beyond snow piles and petty harassment." "Exactly. And there's something else. The special assessment she hit you with. That money was supposedly for repairing the clubhouse roof. I checked with our maintenance contractor. The roof is fine. No repairs needed or planned." I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. This had escalated from annoying HOA dispute to potential criminal activity. "I need to talk to my attorney," Do it fast. The annual meeting is in 3 months. If she can make it to then, she'll get re-elected because most homeowners don't pay attention, and then this all gets buried for another year. James was very interested in Douglas's information. This changes everything. If there's financial misconduct, we're not just talking about HOA violations anymore. This is fraud, possibly theft, definitely breach of fiduciary duty. We need to act fast. We filed a formal demand for a special meeting and a complete financial audit, signed by 15 homeowners from our coalition. Under Colorado law, if 20% of homeowners demand a special meeting, the board has to comply. Our neighborhood had 72 properties, so we needed 15 signatures. We got 23. Patricia tried to fight it, of course. She sent out a letter saying the request was improper, that the annual meeting was sufficient, that the board had already reviewed the finances, and everything was in order. But the law was clear, and when James sent a formal letter threatening legal action, she had no choice but to schedule the meeting. The special meeting was set for a Saturday morning in early April. The notice went out to all homeowners, along with our formal request for a forensic audit and the concerns that had been raised about financial discrepancies. We didn't make specific accusations, but we laid out enough information to make people pay attention. The clubhouse was even more packed than before. News of potential financial misconduct had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People who'd never attended an HOA meeting in their lives showed up. The room was standing room only, with people lining the walls and crowding the doorway. Patricia looked composed, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was clenched. She called the meeting to order and immediately tried to take control of the narrative. We're here because a small group of disruptive homeowners have made baseless accusations about HOA finances. I want to assure everyone that the board takes our fiduciary responsibility seriously, and our books are in perfect order. This is simply a witch hunt led by individuals who are upset about being held accountable for rule violations. She was looking directly at me when she said that last part. I stood up, and James stood with me. Madam President, with all due respect, requesting a financial audit is not a witch hunt. It's a right guaranteed to homeowners under Colorado law. If the finances are in order as you claim, then an audit will confirm that and put everyone's minds at ease. An audit is expensive and unnecessary, Patricia shot back. We'd be wasting HOA funds on a pointless exercise. Sandra Liu spoke up from the board table. Actually, Patricia, I think an audit is exactly what we need. I've been asking for detailed financial documentation for weeks now, and I keep getting incomplete information. As a board member, I should have full access to our financial records, and I don't. Margaret Sullivan looked uncomfortable. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. Patricia has always handled the finances so efficiently. That's part of the problem, Sandra continued. One person shouldn't have unilateral control over HOA funds. That's how mismanagement happens, intentional or not. Todd Brennan, who'd been largely silent in previous meetings, cleared his throat. I've been on this board for 2 years, and I'll be honest, I've just rubber-stamped most of what Patricia presented. I assumed she knew what she was doing. But after Mr. Chen raised concerns, I started looking more carefully at our financial reports. There are a lot of gaps, a lot of unexplained expenses. I support an audit. The room erupted in discussion. Homeowners were shouting questions, demanding answers, asking specific questions about various expenses and projects that had supposedly been completed. Patricia tried to maintain control, but she was losing the room. Everyone, please. This is getting out of hand. The board will take your concerns under advisement and discuss the possibility of an audit at our next meeting." "No," a voice called out from the back. It was Frank Morrison, standing up with several other homeowners. "We're voting on this now." Colorado Statute 3833.3303 gives homeowners the power to approve major expenditures and demand financial accountability. "We want to vote right now on authorizing a forensic audit." James leaned over and whispered to me. Frank did his homework. Patricia's face had gone from red to pale. "This meeting wasn't called for that purpose. We need proper notice for votes." "The meeting notice specifically mentioned financial audit in the subject line," Sandra pointed out. "Everyone here had proper notice." "I move that we vote on authorizing a forensic audit of all HOA financial records for the past 5 years." "I second," Douglas Chen called out from the audience. He'd come despite resigning from the board. The vote was overwhelming. Out of the 60-plus homeowners present or represented by proxy, only 3 voted against the audit. Patricia was one of them, though as HOA president, her vote on this matter was actually advisory rather than binding. The homeowners had spoken. Patricia's composure finally cracked. "Fine. You want an audit. You'll get an audit. And when it shows that everything is proper and correct, I expect apologies from everyone who participated in this farce. This meeting is adjourned." She stormed out of the clubhouse, leaving the remaining board members to handle the logistics. Sandra took charge, suggesting we get bids from 3 different forensic accounting firms and have the homeowners vote on which to use. It was all very democratic and proper, which was clearly not Patricia's style. Over the next 2 weeks, we collected bids and selected a firm that specialized in HOA audits. They were expensive, nearly $15,000, but the homeowners voted to approve the expense. If Patricia had been stealing $80,000, $15,000 to uncover it seemed like a bargain. The auditors requested access to all financial records, bank statements, receipts, contracts, and correspondence related to HOA business. Sandra, as acting treasurer since Douglas's resignation, coordinated the document collection. Patricia dragged her feet, claiming she needed time to gather everything, that some documents were in storage, that others were at her home office. After a week of delays, Sandra issued an ultimatum: provide all documents within 48 hours or be removed from the board for failure to fulfill fiduciary duties. The threat worked. Patricia showed up at the clubhouse with boxes of paperwork, her face tight with barely controlled anger. The audit took 3 weeks. During that time, Patricia was uncharacteristically quiet. No new violation notices, no harassment, no nasty letters. It was like the calm before a storm, and everyone in the neighborhood could feel the tension building. The auditor's report came in mid-May. Sandra called an emergency board meeting and invited all homeowners to attend. Once again, the clubhouse was packed. The lead auditor, a serious woman in her 50s named Carol Henderson, presented the findings. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Our audit of Pinewood Ridge HOA finances revealed significant irregularities and what we believe to be deliberate financial misconduct. Over a period of approximately 3 years, we identified $73,000 in unauthorized or improperly documented expenses. These include payments to vendors that don't exist, personal expenses charged to HOA accounts, and cash withdrawals without proper justification. The room exploded. People were shouting, demanding to know specifics. Carol waited for quiet, then continued. Specifically, we found evidence that HOA funds were used to pay for personal landscaping at the president's residence, personal travel expenses, furniture and appliances that were never delivered to HOA property, and numerous cash withdrawals labeled as petty cash or maintenance expenses with no supporting receipts or documentation. She clicked to a slide showing a detailed breakdown. Every line item was damning. Patricia had been systematically looting the HOA for years. I looked over at Patricia. She was sitting at the board table, her face expressionless, like she'd gone somewhere else entirely in her mind. Based on our findings, Carol concluded, we are required by law to report this to the Boulder Police Department and the Colorado Division of Real Estate. The evidence suggests criminal theft and fraud. That's when Patricia stood up. This is all a mistake. Those were legitimate expenses. I have explanations for everything. This is a conspiracy by people who want to destroy me because I tried to maintain standards in this community. Miss Winters, Carol said calmly, we spoke to the vendors you claim to have paid. Several don't exist. Others confirmed they never did work for the HOA or received payments. We have bank records showing cash withdrawals that you signed for, totaling over $20,000 with no documentation of how that cash was used. These aren't mistakes. This is a pattern of theft. I want to call my attorney, Patricia said, her voice shaking. That's your right, Sandra said. But as of this moment, the board is voting to remove you as president and suspend your access to all HOA accounts and records. All in favor. The 4 remaining board members, Sandra, Todd, Margaret, and a recently appointed replacement for Douglas, all raised their hands. Motion passes. Patricia, you're removed from office effective immediately. Please surrender any HOA property, including keys, credit cards, and documents, to Sandra before you leave. I expected Patricia to argue, to fight, to make a scene. Instead, she just stood there for a moment, looking around the room at all the faces staring back at her. Then she pulled a set of keys and a credit card from her purse, dropped them on the table, and walked out. The silence as she left was absolute. The police investigation moved quickly after that. Detectives came to the neighborhood, interviewed homeowners, collected documents, and subpoenaed bank records. It turned out Patricia's financial problems ran deeper than any of us knew. She'd been living beyond her means for years, and when her husband lost his job 2 years ago, she'd started borrowing from the HOA to maintain her lifestyle, probably thinking she'd pay it back eventually. She was arrested in early June and charged with theft, fraud, and embezzlement. The local news covered it, which was embarrassing for the neighborhood, but also validating for those of us who'd been fighting her tyranny. The headline read, HOA president arrested for stealing thousands from Colorado community. The court process took months. Patricia initially pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, vendor statements, testimony from board members, all of it painted a clear picture of systematic theft. Her attorney eventually negotiated a plea deal. Guilty to felony theft and fraud, 3 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months, and full restitution of the stolen funds plus interest. The sentencing hearing was in October. I attended, along with Sandra, Douglas, and several other homeowners. Patricia looked diminished, smaller somehow, as she stood before the judge. She made a brief statement apologizing for her actions, claiming stress and financial pressure had caused her to make terrible decisions. She didn't mention the harassment, the petty fines, the abuse of power that had preceded and accompanied her theft. The judge wasn't sympathetic. Miss Winters, you were in a position of trust. Your neighbors elected you to manage their community and their funds responsibly. Instead, you stole from them and abused your authority to intimidate anyone who questioned you. This court takes such betrayals very seriously. 3 years in Colorado State Prison, restitution of $73,000 plus $15,000 for the audit costs, and permanent prohibition from serving in any HOA leadership position in Colorado. The gavel came down, and Patricia was led away by the bailiffs. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness watching her go. She'd brought this on herself, no question, but it was still a stark reminder of how power, even small-scale neighborhood power, can corrupt. The HOA underwent major changes after Patricia's removal. Sandra became president and immediately implemented new financial controls, transparent budgeting, regular audits, and term limits for board positions. The bylaws were completely revised, with input from homeowners, to make them reasonable and consistently enforceable. The snow pile regulations. They now simply state that snow should be placed on private property where it doesn't block public walkways or create safety hazards, with no arbitrary distance requirements. Common sense, finally codified. My relationship with the HOA improved dramatically. Sandra actually asked me to join the board, but I declined. I'd had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. Instead, I joined the Architectural Review Committee, helping to streamline the approval process for home improvements and making it less bureaucratic. Frank Morrison and I became good friends through all of this. We still joke about that morning we built snow fortresses at the clubhouse entrance. Best use of snow I've ever been involved with, he likes to say. The neighborhood itself became stronger, ironically. Patricia's downfall and the subsequent reforms brought people together. We started having regular community events, actual enjoyable gatherings rather than mandatory meetings. People looked out for each other instead of reporting each other for minor violations. I learned a lot through this experience. I learned that standing up to bullies, even bureaucratic ones, is worth the effort. I learned that documentation and evidence are your best friends in any dispute. I learned that most people are reasonable if you give them the chance to be, and that change is possible even in systems that seem designed to resist it. I also learned that HOAs don't have to be nightmares. With the right leadership and proper oversight, they can actually serve their intended purpose, maintaining property values and creating a pleasant community environment. It just takes people willing to hold leaders accountable and not blindly accept abuse of authority. As for my house, it's still standing, my driveway is clear every winter, and I pile my snow wherever makes practical sense. No more violation notices, no more harassment, no more midnight vandalism. Just peaceful suburban life in Boulder, Colorado, with mountain views and reasonable neighbors. Sometimes I drive past the clubhouse and remember those massive snow walls we built. The image still makes me smile. It was petty, sure, but it was also the catalyst that exposed corruption and led to real change. Sometimes pettiness serves a greater purpose. Patricia was released on parole after serving 20 months of her sentence. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to Arizona to live with her sister, far away from Colorado winters and HOA politics. I hope she found peace and learned something from the experience, though I honestly don't think about her much anymore. The restitution payments come monthly, automatically deducted from her wages and sent to the HOA. They'll continue for years, a long-term reminder of the consequences of betraying people's trust. The HOA used the recovered funds to make actual improvements, things that benefit everyone: new playground equipment, repaving the community walking trails, upgrading the clubhouse facilities. Life moved on as it does. I'm still writing code from my home office, still dealing with Colorado winters, still living in Pinewood Ridge. But now when I get my HOA newsletter, It's actually informative and helpful rather than threatening. When I see my neighbors, we chat about normal things, weather and sports and local events, rather than complaining about arbitrary violations. The whole experience, from that first ridiculous snow pile fine to Patricia's arrest and conviction, took about 10 months of my life. 10 months of stress, documentation, meetings, and legal proceedings. But it resulted in lasting positive change for an entire community, so I consider it time well spent, and I never did pay that initial $750 fine. It was rescinded, then forgotten, then became a footnote in a much larger story about corruption and accountability. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I just paid it, swallowed my pride, and moved on. The theft might never have been discovered. Patricia might still be bullying homeowners and stealing funds. The neighborhood might still be living under petty tyranny. Instead, I moved some snow, made a point, and accidentally uncovered a crime. Not bad for a software engineer who just wanted to keep his driveway clear. The snow has melted and returned many times since then. Each winter, when the first storm hits and I'm out there with my snowblower, I think about that crazy week when snow piles became the center of my universe. I think about Patricia's shocked face when she saw the clubhouse gates blocked. I think about Douglas Chen's courage in asking difficult questions about finances. I think about Sandra Liu's integrity in pushing for accountability. I think about Frank Morrison helping me move tons of snow in the pre-dawn cold. Mostly, though, I just enjoy the simple pleasure of clearing my driveway without worrying about some arbitrary rule or vindictive fine. Freedom from petty tyranny is something you don't appreciate until you've experienced the alternative. My security cameras are still installed and running, but they mostly just record squirrels, delivery drivers, and the occasional neighborhood cat. No more late-night vandalism, no more mysterious damage to my property. It's boring in the best possible way. I recently helped a new neighbor, a young couple who just moved in, navigate the HOA approval process for a fence they wanted to install. I walked them through the revised bylaws, explained how to submit their application, and assured them the current board was reasonable and responsive. They seemed relieved and mentioned they'd been worried about dealing with an HOA based on horror stories they'd heard. It's not perfect, I told them, but it's manageable. Just keep records of everything, read the bylaws, and don't be afraid to speak up if something seems unreasonable. The system only works if people participate and hold leaders accountable. They thanked me, and as I walked back to my house, I felt oddly proud of what our neighborhood had become. We'd been through a crisis, exposed corruption, removed a toxic leader, and emerged stronger and more united. That's not nothing, so that's my story. The tale of how an HOA fine for snow pile location led to criminal charges, imprisonment, and community transformation. It's not the story I expected to tell when I moved to Pinewood Ridge, but it's the story I have. And honestly, I wouldn't change it. Every frustrating meeting, every threatening letter, every dollar spent on attorney fees, it all led to something better. Well, maybe I'd change the part about my house getting egged. That was just gross. But everything else, worth it. Absolutely worth it. Standing up to bullies always is, even when those bullies hide behind bylaws and parliamentary procedure. Even when they make your life difficult for months. Even when you're tired and frustrated and wondering if it's worth the fight, it is. It always is. And if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, fighting against unreasonable authority or exposing wrongdoing, remember this. Document everything. Seek good legal advice, find allies, and don't back down. Justice might be slow, but it's persistent. Truth has a way of coming out eventually. Also, Snow makes a surprisingly effective form of peaceful protest. Just saying, my driveway is clear, my conscience is clear, and my HOA fees are actually being used for community benefit rather than funding someone's personal expenses. Life is good in Pinewood Ridge these days. The mountains are beautiful, the neighbors are friendly, and the HOA board is functional and accountable. And every winter, when that first big snowstorm rolls in and I fire up my snowblower, I smile and pile that snow wherever the hell makes sense, knowing that sometimes the smallest acts of resistance can lead to the biggest changes. That's the lesson, I suppose. Don't let bullies win, even petty ones. Don't accept corruption or abuse of power, even on a small scale. Stand up, speak out, gather evidence, and fight for what's right. You might be surprised at what you accomplish. And if you happen to have a friend with a skid steer and a good sense of humor, that doesn't hurt either.